With the primary elections now behind us, the focus on the candidates running for public office has shifted now to the home stretch to November 8th, Election Day. And locally, in the state representative district known as Bennington-4, which includes the towns of Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and a part of Sunderland, a competitive race has emerged. Joe Jervis, a resident of Arlington, received enough write-in votes in the Republican primary to get on the ballot in the general election. He will be competing for one of the two seats in the Bennington-4 district. The current incumbents, who are both running for re-election, are Kathleen James and Seth Bongartz. Both are Democrats. We had a chance to speak with all three of the candidates to get a sense of what they saw as the important issues as we entered the general election phase, or what they will be emphasizing during their campaigns. We spoke first with Representative Kathleen James, who was attending a conference in Kentucky via a Zoom call.
Yeah, well, I think that in many ways the next legislative session is going to be defined by a continuation of the work that we've been focused on in the past biennium. And that's one of the reasons that I hope voters will choose to send Seth and I back so that we can continue all of the things that we've been working on. I think that broadband is always an important issue around here. I had helped to found the Southern Vermont CUD a couple of years back, and they're making incredible progress right now to get our county wired up for all the members towns. And so I'm always going to want to be keeping an eye on and making sure that we're moving forward with broadband and connectivity. I think that's so important for our economy, for education, and really just for public safety too. So I'd say broadband is always big for me. Housing is something that Seth and I spent a tremendous amount of time on over the past couple of years. The legislature has invested over the past 3 years $375 million across a broad spectrum of housing investments and programs. And Seth and I had, I know you were there, Andrew. Seth and I organized a housing forum last October, a statewide housing forum that we held down in Arlington. And as a result of that forum, Seth and I introduced a bill that did make it across the finish line. We were very proud of that. That bill is going to make it easier for rural communities like ours to build priority housing projects in their designated downtowns and neighborhoods. So we're going to need to really keep our eye on the ball when it comes to housing. We've got work that we've been doing in Manchester to work on our local housing projects there. We're going to be hosting another forum specific to the Manchester housing situation in late October. And we've made a real effort to stay in touch with leaders in our other communities, especially Arlington, about housing needs there. Childcare is huge. Seth and I were co-sponsors of a very important childcare bill, H-171, that passed a couple of years ago. It's going to be time to come back and take another look at those issues now. Some of the things that the childcare bill did right off the bat were they expanded our CCFAP subsidy. In other words, in regular layman's terms, they made childcare more affordable for a broader range of families. And they also provided support for early childhood educators. We know that early childhood educators are very underpaid. It's very difficult for our childcare providers to pay them competitive salaries. So we've been doing some work on that. And the bill set a really ambitious goal that high quality childcare be affordable for every Vermont family, that no family pay more than 10% of their income on childcare. I think that's a really important goal, and that's a bill, or at least a topic, that I think is going to definitely come up in the next biennium. So that's housing, broadband, and childcare. That is real bread and butter stuff, where Seth and I have made a big impact, and we're going to need to keep working on it because our work in those areas is not done at all. And then obviously something that's always on everybody's minds, how Vermont can respond to the climate crisis, and more importantly, make our state more resilient and help Vermonters transition. Whether some folks like it or not, and whether we like it or not, Climate change is happening. It's impacting our state now. This is not a future issue. But more importantly, the global economy is transitioning. The global economy is shifting, and that the pace of that is going to pick up as we move more and more to renewable energy, as we move more and more to electric vehicles, for example. And we need to make sure that we're positioned to help Vermonters make that tradition or that transition. So help Vermonters get into, for example, EVs or even plug-in hybrids, so they're less reliant on spiking and spiraling gas prices at the pump, and to find more affordable ways to heat their homes and make sure that everybody can afford, to make the transition. And so that concept is called a just transition. It is absolutely critical to all the climate work we do. We can't hide our head in the sands about climate. We need to move forward. We need to position ourselves. We need to look forward to the future, and we need to make sure that Vermonters of all income ranges are ready to take advantage, honestly, of the savings that clean heat and moving toward more electric transportation offers to everybody, or should offer to everybody.
Then we met up with Representative Seth Bongartz, who described some of the issues he would be emphasizing between now and Election Day.
I could really answer with two words: housing, childcare. That is, housing is those two issues together. Those two things together really are at the crux or connected to every other issue that we have that we're facing in this district. And the interesting thing is it really happens to also be true statewide. It's one of those times when the issues that we're looking at locally also line up kind of with what I think if you interviewed candidates from around the state, even the Northeast Kingdom to Brattleboro to Manchester and Arlington, you'd get the same answer. So the housing crisis is actually a legitimate word. It's in this instance is holding us back on every level. It's no secret, and I'm not telling anybody listening to this anything they don't already know. But employers can't find employees. Restaurants are open 4 or 5 nights a week instead of 7. I've talked to my friend Bill Carnes at Bromley about the problems. There's the acute problems they're having. It's all connected to housing, and it's also all connected to childcare. And we were able to make a serious investment in housing over the course of the last 2 years, $350 million. Now, some of it was for short-term, dealing with the emergency of short-term housing, but most of it is for building more housing across Vermont. And we've actually begun to most of it is for what is technically affordable housing, but that also takes pressure off the whole market. But there are some shoots of looking at what we all call here the sort of missing middle, that notch just above or somewhat above the technically affordable housing. There's some beginnings of shoots for looking at some of the things to deal with that issue as well. And one of the things that's kind of an maybe not fully recognized piece of this is wastewater. And in a way, we put about $150 million into clean water, which really means, in most instances, sewer lines and sewer capacity. And that really is almost like putting another $150 million into housing, because that's where it is, on one level, easiest to build housing. It kind of makes intuitive sense that you would do it where you can connect to systems. But also, of course, that's not going to be the case in rural areas. So there's just as much money going. There's money going across the system, but between clean water and some of the other tweaks we made to the way that housing can get built, especially in rural areas, to help make it easier. It's really complicated to get into, but it has to do with expanding the ability of towns to have affordable housing projects in areas without sewer and water. They still have to, of course, meet the regulations, but it loosened the requirements. Loosen's not the right word. It changed the requirements to make it possible to build in areas that you couldn't build before. So all I'm really saying is we took some initial steps on housing that are really pretty substantial and will make a big difference. And this year that is the #1 issue again. But I don't want to leave childcare out of that equation because we passed a law, I know I actually forget whether it was last year or the year before, but anyway, within the last biennium, I think it was the first year, really requiring us as a legislature and as government to deal with the childcare issue by saying that no family should have to pay more than 10% of their income. And now we've got to follow through on that. And it's critical because it's, to state the obvious, you can't work if you don't have childcare, or it doesn't make sense to work if you make less than you're paying in childcare. And so that is the way I have put it, is until we deal with the childcare issue, till we're paying the employees fairly so they can get employees and retain employees, and until we can get to the point that it's affordable for people to utilize our childcare facilities, the economy's not going to run on all eight cylinders. Housing is holding us back from the economy running on all 8 cylinders. Childcare is holding us back from the economy running on all 8 cylinders. We must deal with both of those. And I think that's going to be just as much an issue this time around as it was the first two. And I'll add one other thing, that I think the legislature, we've pumped a lot of money into these programs over the last 2 years because of the federal ARPA money and other funds that came to the state. And I think we also have now the responsibility to make sure that the programs are actually being implemented the way that we envision them being implemented. Oftentimes, legislation will pass and go over to the agencies, and the legislature kind of forgets about it. I think it's really important that because there's so much money moving through the pipeline that we're trying to get out the ways that we envisioned it to get out, for us to step back and hold some hearings within the committees and just make sure, talk to the administrators and make sure that the money is being allocated and utilized in the way that we envisioned it. Just to follow up, it's a responsible thing to do.
And then we had a chance to speak with Mr. Gervais about what prompted him to throw his hat into the ring.
What prompted me to run? I'm just looking at the direction the country's going in right now, and we need change. People are being burdened by inflation, energy costs, and a lot of this comes back to our fiscal policy, both at the state and federal level. Certainly, first and foremost is the economy. Secondly is education. I had an interesting experience a few weeks ago. Stopped for an ice cream cone at a local ice cream stand, and an 8th grader was serving me, and he had trouble making change. And he goes, I've really struggled with math. They're not teaching me math in the school. My dad's been tutoring me. And it's like, we want to ensure that our kids get a good, solid education, that they can be productive in the workforce after they graduate. And we need to get back to those basics. I'm concerned about our borders and what that's doing to drugs in Vermont and crime in Vermont. We're seeing a lot of problems down in the South Shire, so we need to look at our borders. And, we need to ensure that our Constitution is upheld. There's been a lot of questions about election integrity. There's a lot of questions about free speech, about our Second Amendment. The Constitution was there so that we, the people, can have our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to ensure that we get back to protecting our Constitution in all we do in the government and taking the power back to where it belongs. The federal government's gone through huge expansion, and the federal government only has the powers that the states give it. So we need to ensure that the states aren't ceding excess power to the federal government. We've got a wonderful Supreme Court right now, and there were a lot of decisions made right before the close of the session, the end of June. And in my view, the most significant of those was West Virginia versus EPA, where the Supreme Court said, EPA, you don't have the ability to be a lawmaker. You're pushing these regulations without legislative support. That needs to stop. And when we look across our state and across the nation, what organizations are creating regulations that are impeding business that aren't supported by legislation. There's a whole huge opportunity to rein in government that's been out of control here. You know, Vermont, we want to protect the integrity of the voter. So we both make it extremely difficult for the boards of civil authority to remove voters from the voter rolls, while at the same time allow voters to register the day of election. What that results in is very bloated voter rolls. Right in my town of Arlington, we have more registered voters than we have residents in Arlington. And bloated voter rolls are where the fraud starts. I'm not saying that we're having fraudulent elections in Arlington, but it's a concern. And there's a number of areas where improvements can be made so that citizens ensure that their votes are actually counted and actually matter. Well, I mean, certainly there's the question of who is Joe Jervis? You know, I didn't grow up in Arlington. I grew up in another small town in New England. My wife is an Arlington native, an Arlington high school graduate. I've been living in Arlington for the last 10 years. I bring the voters a wealth of business experience. I spent 30 years in the technology field as a business executive. I've got a master's of business administration, so I know how to crunch numbers. I know how to look at business plans. But I also, you know, can take very complex problems and distill them down into terms that people understand, and I can find holes in things. You know, we look at what we're trying to do with climate change, and you know, first we've got to go back and look at the science. Is the science really accurate, or is money dictating the science? The grants that are being given to the scientists to do the research here. And then when we look at the solution, is the solution something that's actually practical? We saw what happened to Texas a year and a half ago when they had the terrible winter storm and all their solar and their wind power went down, and their electrical grid was on the brink of collapse. I lived in California for a number of years and experienced the brownouts there because of insufficient grid. We're pushing to move from fossil fuels over to renewable energy, but we need to make sure the solution actually works. I'm making a small upgrade at my home, and I'm trying to get an electrical panel for a meter socket. It's a 56-week lead time just to get a meter socket. That's just in the last mile. Where's all the infrastructure all the way back on the grid to these new renewable plants? We need to make sure everything is in place rather than pushing regulation that's going to drive a lot of small businesses out of business and end up with a solution that's not practical in the end.
Absentee ballots will be mailed out to those who requested them by October 1st, according to the Secretary of State's website, but you have to request them first. For questions about early voting or voting by absentee ballot, contact your town clerk. Otherwise, see you at the polls on Election Day. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.